But I remember one of the first times young rabbinical student, I went out and did my adult education thing. One of my first ones, I was at a Chavurah, and I was talking about it, and I said, well, we don't believe in a great-grandfather in the sky who has all the answers. And a woman in the room began to cry. She said, that's exactly what I believe about God. She says, I believe that God is like a great-grandfather in the sky. When I think about God, he has a beard, he has all the wisdom, he's taking care of me. How dare you say that that's not God? I went, whoa, I just got schooled, right? Right? It is not up to me to start going around saying, here's the official theology. Every other theology is decrepit and not worth thinking. So the idea that we live in the presence of a great wise being that takes care of us, I think is very, very much rooted into into human nature. So what you have in Genesis is, unlike the other parts of the Bible, this divine being doesn't seem to be deeply involved in human experience, but we are somehow in the image of this divine being and put into this great order. Now, one question is, why is it, when you think of that God creates man and woman, the text seems to be in one body and then split. Something that is completely unique to the Bible is the asexuality of God. In every single other mythic tradition, the human being comes into existence because of some sexuality of primeval gods, typically a male god and a female god, or something happened where the human being is generated by some kind of sexual act, some kind of fertility act. Something in the late history of our people disidentified God from fertility. And we seem to take that for granted, but it really was a revolution in thought. And it's a revolution in thought, and again, I wish I had the words to describe how stupendous this was, this idea, that if the main concern of human beings had been fertility, the crops to grow, the animals to grow, and then defend the walls, a God who would defend the walls, a God of war, the idea that God was the ultimate dispenser of justice was not deeply in people's understanding of God. I'm not saying that people didn't have the idea of God of justice and there wasn't law codes, but the idea of justice was more to resolve disputes between human beings. Gods were those that protected the walls and provided fertility. The ultimate identity of God was not the lawgiver. God only gave law to the degree that human beings needed law to resolve our differences. Try to think for a moment when someone says, forget about the God who's going to guard our walls, because God might guard our walls and might not guard our walls depending on if we're good human beings or not. And so it says, well, why should I believe in a God like that? Someone said, well, that's what God is. God is not here to protect you. You are here to live God's law. And if you don't, God will not defend the walls. You can sacrifice as many people as you want. You can involve yourself in as much cult fertility as you want. The crops won't grow if you violate God's moral law. The walls will not be defended if you do not keep God's law. This is a revolution in thought that is almost impossible for us to comprehend, that the very definition of God was radically transformed very late in our history, and then in many ways projected back on to the text. So the opening part of Genesis, because my deep sense it was written by people somewhat late in our history who were trying to understand the human condition, they wrote an overture to the Bible that, when you think, is actually constructed by philosophers who did not yet know about philosophy or had chosen not to philosophize, but rather express a philosophy in a narratival form, meaning this very solemn, elegant Genesis myth. What it tells you is that the world is orderly. The world is not chaotic. God set everything in its place. And if there's chaos in the world, it's because we've brought that chaos into the world. So I want you just to think for a moment about the philosophic implications of that. I was talking earlier today about where we came from and where we're going. Many of us experience profound chaos in our lives. Relationships go wrong, things go wrong at work. We don't know how to manage all the things going on within us. Sometimes people think that they're the only one who has this deep conflicts about your identity and what you're supposed to be doing and your inner life. And one reason it hurts us so much, oftentimes, is chaos in our lives, is because we have an instinctive sense that there is an order, that things could be better. There's a standard by which we should live, and we just can't get ourselves there. There's some part of us, by the way, in some philosophic systems, I actually mentioned earlier, happens to be mine, that we're never going to get it right, that we're existentially thrown into a world where our standard for behavior is unachievable. I think that's part of the the greatest pain of the human condition. We can all conceive of things rectified. We have a profound existential inability to do it. That, I think, for me, names some of the greatest pain of the human condition. The author of Peace seems to think that there's this great order out there. If we could align ourselves to it, we could overcome the chaos in our lives. Now, even though I don't believe it's fundamentally possible, I still act as if it is possible. I mean, there's something in my humanity that says, if I don't buy into this idea that there's a way to bring it into tune, that there's a tuning fork, and I can hit the right note, and if I could merge my consciousness the right way, there's a moment when I could tune in to the utter and deep harmony of everything, and in moments of chaos, I could go back to that harmony. That's the first chapter of Genesis. The first chapter of Genesis, that everything can be brought together.